Okay, thank you. I'm going to start because we have a lot of great presentations to get through. So welcome and thank you for joining us for this session. The title of this session is Who Pays and Who Benefits from the Crisis. I will be moderating the session. I'm Faiza Shaheen from the New Economics Foundation, which is a think tank based in London, and we operate under the banner of economics as if people and the planet mattered, and we do a lot of work on the structural change that would be needed to bring about a more socially just and sustainable economy. So really just to start with the meaning of crisis, when I first saw the word crisis, I really thought about this in three ways. So firstly is the financial collapse and the recession and the impact of that, the austerity measures that have taken place across Europe, and then for some countries like Portugal and Greece, where there has been a bigger debt crisis and the issue of the euro, there are other ways that the crisis have been felt. And the reason why I thought about it in that way is because the recession, to some extent, financial collapse, some would argue that you can blame less on government, but austerity in those measures were very much brought about by government policy. So today we're really lucky to be joined by 5 speakers from across Europe. France, Belgium, Portugal, Greece and Ukraine are represented on the panel. We're also hoping to hear from people elsewhere to hear your experiences. And the objectives really, firstly in strand 1, is to think about the impact of the recession and austerity on poverty and inequality, to describe that impact. We have a mixture here of people that will speak about that from a quantitative or data perspective, and then we have people that work on the ground and are seeing the impact of that with their clients. We also want to think about the longer-term impacts and about the responses to this crisis, both on the ground level, locally and nationally. And the second part, and this is to do with what I have to report back tomorrow, is to think about proposals and measures that can be adopted to re-establish social justice. And I've asked all speakers to consider this in their presentations. To some extent, we can all describe the difficulties, the crisis, the struggle that is going on right now. And really, if we're going to move on to action, we need to start thinking about the change that we want to see. So we'll have at least 45 minutes at the end where we will open up to that discussion. And the format of the session will be that we'll have the speakers, starting with Adeline. We'll have them speak for 10 minutes, and then I will stop them at that point. We'll open up for 5 minutes of clarification questions, because I'm keen to get you involved early on, and then we'll move on to the next presentation. Okay, so I don't want to hold up the discussion any longer. So let's start with Adeline Otto, who's from Solidar, which is a European network of NGOs working to advance social justice. And she coordinates the work related to European and social and employment policy, social and employment policies. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Okay, that's working. Thanks for the introduction. As was already mentioned, we are a European network, so based in Brussels, and we're representing like civil society organizations, but also labor movements, trade union organizations, and a lot of not-for-profit social service and healthcare providers, but also education service providers. So I try to keep it very short since we only have 10 minutes. There are lots of statistics and lots of data, but I quickly go over it. It's just to give you an idea, an impression about the trends and the figures. So first of all, I will speak about like our approach towards inequality, poverty and social exclusion, the recent developments and trends, before I then have a look at the long-term impacts and come up with some ideas in investment and innovation for social inclusion. Our members have, like many other organizations from not-for-profit side, NGOs, representing poverty, people experiencing and facing poverty and social exclusion. It's a multiple life dimension approach, so it encompasses living conditions and resources in several dimensions. It goes beyond just like praising that the only way out of poverty is labor market, participation in labor market, and it highlights the importance of interpersonal relationships, of health, education, political and culture participation. And it's not just limited to insufficient income, but also reflects development deficits, low self-confidence, reduced social competences, undersupply, material deprivation and isolation, which then have negative impacts on health, on nutrition, well-being, and social cohesion. But we would go much further than this, and also, could you just turn, yeah. Not only speaking about poverty, which is looking at people living or suffering from a situation among a certain poverty threshold, but in general looking at inequalities in society is going much further than this. So there can be a hegemonial and a functional inequality, and they both include inequalities of earnings and income, social status, educational opportunities, output or outcome, access to and process of certain policies, and it can be related to gender, age, nationality, or ethnicity. And I heard that Renato will speak a little bit more about the inequality approach. And inequalities matter, and that's why it's important to look at both inequalities, poverty, and social exclusion, because they have quite negative impact on several dimensions, and that includes civil and cultural, societal participation, health, education, but also security and social cohesion. What are the recent trends? I think in the documents you got with the big bag, there were some data already. So we could see during the crisis an increase of the extent and depth of poverty and social exclusion, and from a multi-dimensional nature. So it's not only at risk of poverty that increase, but also income after transfer, poverty, the material, severely material deprived, the share of these people increased. I will have a look at the data later on. So you can see, and also in work at risk of poverty increased. So you can see that there's not just one dimension of poverty. And in addition to that, we can observe from the latest data that was in the social protection annual report, but also in the latest report from the Commission about social development in Europe, that this is a diverging impact. Like, it's not the same in all the member states. We can observe quite different developments, and there's a strong rise in inequalities, but also especially in poverty and social exclusion in the southern and peripheral member states, but not forgetting about the different the disparities also when it comes to within one member states, looking at the different levels, so regional levels, or even if you compare rural or urban area, if you compare cities and suburbs. The dynamic, sorry, no, that was too quick. The dynamics and persistence of poverty, there we could see, according to the data that was lately published, that there was an increase of persistent poverty in several member states. That means a high entry and low exit rate. That is notably the case for Bulgaria, Romania, and the other countries listed there. And in addition to that, again, I wanted to have a look at the inequalities. In general, we could observe, or we can observe, income inequality, which is at the highest level since last 15 years. But I also saw data which actually showed a quite interesting, interesting development. It's that at the peak of the crisis, there was an asymmetric effect of the crisis on profits and on wages, which actually made it that inequalities decreased at the peak. But then, if we look at a later stage, of course, the impact on wages was again growing. But at this time, actually, inequalities were decreasing. And as I said, we have a broader perspective on inequalities, and there we can say that the crisis negatively impacted the access to education, but also housing, healthcare, employment, or pension system, decent pension. So these are the figures, and I would really just, I will not explain them in detail. I just thought it might be worth having a look at them if someone wants to have the presentation later on, that could be useful. So there's an increase of the at-risk of poverty rate since 2008 until 2011, and I mentioned even the geographical areas where this is specifically the case. The at-risk of income poverty, that means after social transfer, was increasing. The share of the severely material deprived as well. So these are people who, I know that this was or is highly criticized because it looks at certain basics that are obviously crucial to have a decent life, but then it's the question, okay, who decides about what is actually needed in different member states or different regions, about what's really important. But still it gives an idea about the most relevant things like having electricity or water. As I said, there's also an increase in the low work intensity household, and the share of people living in low intensity households. And it's said that this is actually the most significant increase during the crisis. And I was actually surprised to see that Belgium has a quite high score. And a dimension that is increasingly the case is in work at risk of poverty, which again reflects the fact that just having employment is not enough to be out of the risk, to be not in poverty or at risk of poverty. And that was especially, again, countries like Belgium. This is just to give you an overview about the percentage of the population and then at risk of poverty and exclusion, at risk of poverty, severely materially deprived and low work intensity households. If we speak about poverty, we also have to speak about unemployment, because having a look at the risk groups, which will be the next slide, that it's quite important that the share or the risk of living in poverty or being at risk of poverty, living or being facing social exclusion is very high among unemployed people. So we have a historically high level, 10.6% in September 2012, which is a rise of 2.1 million unemployed in 1 year. We have a very high level or significant level of underemployed, long-term unemployment, youth unemployment, and migrant unemployment. TCN is third country nationals, so that looks at the share of people of third country nationals which are unemployed. And it's quite interesting because that's twice more the share than EU nationals, but if you then also compare it to youth unemployment, it's quite interesting to compare the two figures. Okay, the risk groups. Unemployed, as I said, but just having a look at the at risk of poverty rate. I didn't compare it with others. People living in single households and large families, and that's quite interesting because it's actually confirming the new social risks theory, so that where risks are more or less related to work life arrangements, but more to economic and social structural changes, and specifically for people who have care responsibilities and who live in single parent households and large families. Young people, children, women, older people, and of course, as I said, there are disparities between the different member states. So you can see that where there is a high share of good pension systems, they were working as stabilizers, and it's not hitting across the European Union older people in general, but in specific member states which had not so well established pension systems to actually, to work as an economic stabilizer. That was the case that people faced poverty. People with migrant background and Roma, people with disabilities, and homeless people. As I said, having a look at inequalities, but also poverty, social services, in-kind services really matter. And here we have an overview about unmet need of healthcare that increased in several countries over the period. And that is particularly the case for Greece, Poland, and Latvia. And I just wanted to show that because it's quite astonishing, especially when we look at Latvia. So the long-term impact, I think there's a long list. I just try to put together and have really a look at the long-term impact as such. There is an alternative. What we're having now is fiscal consolidation, social retrenchment, cost containment, and the whole story about we have to placate investors. It was said that to avoid spillover effects, we have to stabilize banks. I cannot see that they really have been stabilized and that there is no risk of this happening again. I can also not see that banking, in general, banking systems are much more solid and risk-averse. But what we can see definitely is, in addition to that, a decreasing state commitment. And I would not say in general, but we can see that there is an increasing share of third pillar solutions in pension systems and healthcare systems, decentralized services, a further shift of responsibilities to individuals as rational choice actors. That's very much going into the direction of, far from solidarity and reciprocity, social inclusion towards user freedom, choice, individualism. And you can see that if you look, for instance, just late yesterday, the social investment package was published, and it goes very much into that direction: more activation, more self-responsibility, more conditionality, more targeting, more selectivity for social benefits, more activation as if it would be the responsibility alone of these individuals that they are suffering from the situation they find themselves in. And that goes very much into a regulatory state, where we can then discuss whether this is also a depolitization, leading to depolitization. We can see increasingly an unbalanced focus on resilience, at least that's what we observed, that there are lots of programs and papers now on resilience, and I would never say that this is something bad. Of course, we should see in how far policies can improve resilience, and how far the resilience in the social work, working with people, can be improved, but it should not be in an unbalanced way, so that we don't look actually at the origins of the crisis, and we do fight inequalities, but we just learn how to better accommodate and recover or absorb shocks. You can see a decrease in quality in public services. We know from our members that there were closure or inappropriate merging of services, of support services, particularly for vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. Staff reductions, and an increasing intensity in work, worsening pay and working conditions, and unequal access to education, housing, healthcare, employment, and decent work, decent pensions. Sorry.
Just one more minute, thanks.
Yeah, we're nearly there. You can also see that that's what I said about the new social risk recalibration, and that is very much linked to the compensation inequality, from a compensation inequality approach towards a capacitating fairness reciprocity. I would not necessarily say that this is something bad. I see actually a lot of advantages in the capacitating fairness approach, but I have the feeling it's very much working towards building capacities for people to be to increase their employability. So it's very much driven by labor market integration, and that's a risk which I can see. What I said about increasing a transfer of responsibility towards the individual and third pillar solutions, we can see an increasing horizontal redistribution, so certain risk groups are pooled together instead of a vertical redistribution among the whole society of risks and wealth. And maybe the last point is quite important. As I said yesterday, I was really shocked to see that the Commission is actually really recommending going from more universal schemes to more conditionality, more selectivity, and more targeting of social benefits. And we can maybe discuss that later. These are the proposals, how well we could try to make it better. Invest in social cohesion instead of cutting down social benefits. Invest in social protection systems who, during the crisis, as statistics said, have proven to be macroeconomic stabilizers, poverty reducers, and employment promoters. Provide universal social protection schemes at poverty-preventing levels. What do I mean? I saw that some of the papers mentioned poverty-proof. That could be misunderstood. I use poverty-preventing to make sure it's above the poverty threshold. Through the life cycle, as well as universal access to inclusive public services and infrastructures that can be topped up by targeted and tailor-made support. Ensure poverty-preventing minimum income schemes. It's a human right. If you really want to fight poverty, provide a poverty-preventing minimum income scheme. And ensure sustainable financing by supporting increased revenue through tax justice, progressive taxation, with a higher focus on income, capital, and maybe environmental tax. I rush through the next slide.
Maybe we could come back to some of these policy proposals in a later discussion. Thank you for that, Adeline. Quite a good overview for what's going on in Europe. Potentially some of the averages there are masking what's going on in some of the individual countries. And it's quite a depressing story there, even with long-term trends. Doesn't really go alongside what we heard Guy Standing saying this morning about this end of this neoliberal agenda and potentially about to, on the brink of a new kind of economic paradigm. Okay, so we want to move on, but just in between, if there are any quick questions, any pressing questions from the audience. Sure, please do say your name and the organisation that you're from. Thank you.
Just a very quick comment to Mrs. Otto's presentation. I was just talking to a journalist yesterday from from the Financial Times, and he made the comment when I told him that I was coming here. He says, "Oh yeah, we have very serious problems in Southern Europe." And because he's from the Financial Times, and I said, well, I know many places in the UK that are not in Southern Europe, which have a very serious problem of inequality. And so when I saw your presentation, I was thinking about my conversation with him yesterday. And I would just beg you to consider when you talk about these issues, that you actually mention what's happening in Northern and Central Europe, because there are pockets of the same problems all over Europe. We can go to the banlieue in Strasbourg or in Paris.
That's what I mentioned when I said it's not only looking at between the member states, but within member states, looking at the regional, national, urban and rural areas or city centres compared to suburbs. Yeah.
I totally agree with you.
Okay. Yeah. Are there any other questions at this stage? Okay, great. We'll move on to Cédric, who was the founder and ex-coordinator of the Inequality Watch. He's going to present in French, I believe. Yeah. So for those of you like me who don't understand French very well, put on your headphones. Okay, great. So we've started with a European-wide picture, and we're going to talk now specifically about countries. Thank you. Thanks, Cédric.
Bonjour à tous. Juste pour vous expliquer un peu d'où je viens, donc, je suis un représentant de l'Observatoire français des inégalités qui a travaillé avec d'autres structures comme celle que représente Renato Carmo pour fonder un réseau européen sur les inégalités, donc, qui s'appelle Inequality Watch. Voilà, c'est pour ça que je représente un peu les deux étiquettes. Ce que je voudrais vous dire aujourd'hui, premièrement, c'est que la France, contrairement peut-être à d'autres pays comme le Portugal ou la Grèce ou l'Espagne, eh bien, sont relativement protégés finalement, enfin, pas protégés de la...
Sorry, just to say it's on channel 2 if you wanna...
Thank you. Donc je disais, voilà, la France en fait fait quand même partie des pays les plus riches du monde, et c'est un fait qu'il faut avoir à l'esprit lorsqu'on parle d'inégalité et de pauvreté en France. Donc je voulais vous le rappeler à travers donc, la première page de ce premier graphique qui indique en fait tout simplement bien que parmi les nations les plus riches du monde, dont la France fait partie, bien la France est aussi un des pays les plus égalitaires en termes en tout cas d'accès aux revenus. C'est une réalité. Vous voyez, donc la France est quasiment au niveau de pays nordiques comme la Suède ou la Finlande. Donc évidemment, en raison de ce contexte-là, on ne rencontre pas nécessairement les mêmes problèmes que l'on peut rencontrer dans d'autres pays européens notamment. Donc c'est un fait important que je voulais rappeler ici avant de commencer. Malgré tout, nous avons également nos problèmes évidemment. Et un des problèmes que rencontre en ce moment la France, et depuis maintenant 10-15 ans, c'est qu'au niveau des revenus, comme on le voit sur le graphique, mais également au niveau de l'accès à l'éducation, l'accès à la santé, l'accès à tout un ensemble de biens fondamentaux, on observe une augmentation assez importante des inégalités. Donc ici, vous voyez, on compare en fait dans ce graphique l'évolution du niveau de vie moyen de du décile le plus élevé, du décile le plus bas. Je ne sais pas si vous connaissez le terme de décile. En fait, en gros, on compare très souvent, donc en termes statistiques, au niveau des revenus, on compare le niveau de vie des 10% les plus riches avec celui des 10% les plus pauvres. Et à chaque fois, on prend, c'est la partie un peu plus complexe du propos, à chaque fois, on prend le niveau le plus bas des 10% les plus riches et on le compare au niveau de vie le plus haut des 10% les plus pauvres. Ce qui implique qu'on ne connaît pas tout simplement la dispersion qui existe au sein du décile le plus élevé et du décile le plus pauvre. Tout simplement, lorsqu'on prend en compte le décile le plus bas des 10% les plus riches, enfin le niveau de vie des 10% les plus riches, on ne prend pas en compte, finalement, les niveaux de vie très élevés qui existent au sein de ce décile supérieur. Et donc, ce que reprend ce graphique, ce sont les niveaux de vie moyens. Et ce qu'on observe? On observe deux choses. La première chose, c'est que le niveau de vie moyen des 10% les plus riches augmente très fortement depuis 10 ans. Et en fait, la crise économique et sociale que nous connaissons depuis 2008, alors là, le graphique s'arrête en 2010, mais la courbe, l'évolution reste la même par la suite. Donc on observe que finalement, le niveau de vie moyen des plus riches continue à s'accroître malgré la crise économique et sociale. De l'autre côté de l'échiquier, donc pour disons, on peut prendre les 50%, mais aussi les 10% les plus pauvres, on observe donc une stagnation, pas une baisse, mais une stagnation du niveau de vie de ces, du niveau de revenu de ces déciles. Donc, un point quand même qui est extrêmement important, c'est qu'on assiste à une augmentation des inégalités de revenus, ça c'est la première chose, mais cette augmentation des inégalités, elle n'est pas due à un appauvrissement des plus pauvres, mais à un enrichissement plus rapide des plus riches. Ça, c'est un point extrêmement important. Parce qu'en fait, cette réalité-là, elle existe dans d'autres pays européens, mais en France, on n'a pas une explosion de la pauvreté. C'est-à-dire que c'est faux d'affirmer cela. En revanche, ça n'empêche pas que, évidemment, il y a un certain nombre de problèmes qui se posent, mais voilà, celui-ci est inexact. Un point quand même qui est extrêmement important également en termes statistiques. Alors en fait, là on est plus sur une réflexion sur les moyens dont on dispose, enfin, les ressources dont on dispose et celles dont on ne dispose pas. On sait très peu de choses sur les riches, en France d'ailleurs comme en Europe. On sait très peu de choses sur leur niveau de patrimoine, sur leur niveau de revenus. C'est très difficile d'établir finalement l'évolution du niveau de vie des plus riches, notamment en ce qui concerne le patrimoine, donc voilà, immobilier, valeur financière. Et donc, évidemment, on connaît assez peu l'impact de la crise économique sur ce niveau de patrimoine. On sait en revanche qu'il est assez faible. Par contre, on a des données plus précises sur l'évolution de la pauvreté, évidemment, en raison de la crise économique et sociale. Et un point qui est extrêmement important, évidemment, c'est l'augmentation du chômage. Donc c'est un point essentiel, évidemment, une conséquence essentielle de la crise économique et sociale que nous connaissons. Et ce qu'il faut bien avoir à l'esprit, alors c'est le cas pour la France et peut-être d'ailleurs aussi pour d'autres pays européens, c'est que ces nouveaux chômeurs, donc cette augmentation du chômage, elle n'est pas forcément due à une baisse, une augmentation du chômage des gens qui ont un emploi stable, mais bien plutôt à une augmentation du chômage pour les travailleurs précaires. Pour ceux qui sont en travail intérim, en contrat à durée déterminée, pour le dire rapidement. Non, pardon. Merci. Donc voilà, ce que je veux juste dire à travers ce slide, c'est donc de dire que l'augmentation du chômage, l'accroissement du chômage, il est surtout connu par les travailleurs précaires. Ce sont eux les premières victimes finalement en France de la crise économique et sociale. Et donc la question qu'il faut évidemment du coup, on a évidemment une égalité qui existe en France et d'ailleurs aussi dans d'autres pays européens entre ce qu'on appelle les insiders et les outsiders. Entre ceux qui donc ont un emploi stable et qui le préservent. Bon, alors évidemment, il y a on est sur des moyennes, hein, c'est-à-dire qu'évidemment des gens perdent leur emploi, c'est pas la question, mais en moyenne, ce sont davantage des gens qui sont travailleurs précaires qui le perdent. Et donc on a des inégalités qui augmentent de fait de la crise entre insiders et outsiders. Et la question qui convient de se poser dans ce cadre, c'est qui sont finalement ces personnes qui sont donc travailleurs précaires. Et donc ces travailleurs précaires sont en majorité des jeunes. Et ce qui peut expliquer ce phénomène d'augmentation importante de la pauvreté des jeunes en France depuis quelques années. Mais encore une fois, ce phénomène d'augmentation de la pauvreté, qui touche en particulier les jeunes et aussi les personnes âgées, mais pour d'autres raisons, la crise en fait a amplifié un phénomène qui était déjà existant. C'est un point extrêmement important. Et donc, évidemment, outre les jeunes, les personnes non diplômées sont plus concernées que les autres, et puis sans doute les migrants. J'ai mis un point d'interrogation tout simplement parce qu'on ne dispose pas en France de données selon l'origine, donc on ne peut pas véritablement connaître, encore une fois, l'évolution exacte de cette catégorie de personnes. Donc ça, c'était pour le constat général. Maintenant, disons très rapidement les solutions qu'on pourrait mettre en œuvre face à la crise et au-delà, face à ces inégalités croissantes entre insiders et outsiders. Je pense que c'est le fond du problème. On a une augmentation importante de la précarité de l'emploi en France. On a une telle augmentation également en Allemagne. C'est-à-dire que peut-être que vous connaissez très bien les débats en France sur le rapport qu'on a à l'Allemagne, mais le modèle allemand est souvent considéré comme un modèle parce que notamment il y a moins de chômage en Allemagne qu'en France, par exemple. Mais ce qu'on oublie de dire très souvent, c'est que ce chômage moindre, il est aussi dû à un travail précaire plus important. Et donc, ce qui convient d'avoir à l'esprit, c'est la qualité de l'emploi également, évidemment. Et donc, ce que je propose, évidemment, trop rapidement, c'est donc de réduire les inégalités entre insider et outsider, pas donc en mettant en œuvre un principe peut-être de flexicurité, en permettant aux personnes qui ont un emploi stable et bien d'être licenciées plus rapidement, mais aussi de trouver un emploi plus rapidement. Ce n'est pas ça que je propose. Je propose au contraire d'augmenter la protection des outsiders. Donc pas de diminuer celle des insiders, mais d'augmenter celle des outsiders. Et pour ça, à mon avis, il est nécessaire de penser la protection sociale disons, de manière indépendante du marché de l'emploi. C'est-à-dire qu'aujourd'hui, en France, mais également dans d'autres pays européens toujours, eh bien, la protection sociale, on l'a parce qu'on travaille, et en fait, disons qu'elle existe partout ailleurs, mais elle est meilleure si on a un emploi, et notamment un emploi stable. Et aujourd'hui, avec l'augmentation de cette précarité au travail, eh bien, il est peut-être nécessaire de construire un système de protection sociale, et au-delà, disons, non pas une allocation universelle, mais un accès universel à des institutions fondamentales, comme l'éducation, comme la santé, comme peut-être le logement social. Voilà, tout un ensemble de choses, d'éléments fondamentaux qui sont nécessaires pour permettre à tout à chacun d'avoir non seulement un niveau de vie décent, mais surtout d'avoir la possibilité même de construire sa vie. Et donc pour cela, en fait, ça peut paraître assez simple, assez basique comme idée, mais il est nécessaire de faire appel à l'impôt progressif, comme ça a été dit précédemment. Mais c'est une chose qui existe, qui est mise en œuvre, disons, depuis quelques mois maintenant avec le nouveau gouvernement en France, à l'arrivée de François Hollande. Le problème, c'est qu'on demande seulement aux plus riches de payer plus d'impôts. Je pense qu'il est essentiel, dans une réflexion sur la solidarité, de demander à chacun, dans la mesure de ses moyens évidemment, de contribuer à ce système social, parce que finalement tout le monde bénéficie de ce système. Et donc peut-être que pour sortir un peu de cette idéologie de la méritocratie, vous savez, ou l'idée selon laquelle on y arrive parce que on y arrive tout simplement parce qu'on a beaucoup travaillé, parce que ce qu'on a, on le mérite quelque part, on ne le doit qu'à nous-mêmes. En fait, cette idée-là, elle est, à mon avis, à mon sens, extrêmement fausse, mais on est dans un système qui finalement valorise une telle idée. Et donc, ce qui est nécessaire, à mon avis, de faire et de penser, c'est de rappeler que finalement, si je suis aujourd'hui capable de vous parler, alors en français, pas en anglais, désolé, mais si je suis capable de m'exprimer devant vous aujourd'hui, c'est parce que j'ai accédé à l'éducation, parce que j'ai un accès assez positif à la santé, etc. Et l'idée, finalement, c'est de permettre à tout le monde de reconnaître ce fait que si nous sommes ce que nous sommes aujourd'hui, c'est parce que nous vivons dans une société relativement riche et que donc nous avons pu construire notre vie grâce à l'apport de cette société, et qu'il est donc normal que chacun, parce que chacun en bénéficie, que chacun, en même temps, y contribue de manière plus importante. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Cédric. Yeah, I appreciate the way that was introduced with France. And France has been one of the countries that is looked upon with some jealousy by countries such as the UK in terms of what it's done on inequality. Now, inequality has risen in many European countries, and especially in some countries such as the UK since the 1970s. And actually, in the more recent era, France has been one of the few countries where we haven't seen inequality increase. It's more stagnated. But I do understand that there are inequalities within groups within France. So if I have a question to you, it's about, you didn't get to talk about migrants there, but we know that there are ethnic minority groups that are more affected by poverty. So I'd be interested in hearing if they've been particularly affected by the crisis. So we've heard a couple of things, again, about stagnation in incomes. Again, that's something that we see in the UK in terms of median incomes. That actually, for the UK, was even before the recession. So this is a real problem with the way the economy is working. And also, again, about how young people are being affected. We'll come back to these points in a fuller discussion, but just right now, if there are any clarification questions or any questions that are pressing. Yes, thanks.
I would like to ask to compare this solidarity in taxes with the fairness issue which was pointed out this morning. How, in which way it is fair to talk about solidarity in taxes if we talk about this group of people vulnerable in poorness?
Maybe we can, if you want to answer that very briefly, and then we can come back to that question
Later
at
on
the
is
end.
okay.
Yeah.
Oui, non, enfin, non,
Are there any other questions
Okay,
just
okay.
before you? Yeah, sure.
Voilà. Vous m'entendez? Voilà. Donc, je travaille dans un centre. Je travaille dans un centre public donc à Charleroi, donc une ville de Belgique. Et nous sommes amenés évidemment à aider des familles, des personnes qui sont en situation de pauvreté, notamment dans le cadre donc, de l'octroi du revenu d'intégration sociale en Belgique. Et un jour, d'ailleurs j'ai aussi une question j'ai une question aussi à poser parce que vous avez été un peu trop vite, vous n'avez pas regardé. Mais je n'arrive pas. Je n'arrive vraiment pas, je suis désolé. À moins d'augmenter. Vous m'entendez? Oui. Excusez-moi. Donc voilà, donc je disais, donc je travaille dans un centre public d'action sociale en Belgique, et donc nous sommes amenés aussi à aider des familles en situation de pauvreté, en détresse. Donc, et donc là, j'avais une question aussi à poser à Madame Otto. C'est parce que vous avez débrayé tout de suite après. Et donc j'aurais une question également pour vous. Voilà, dans la présentation graphique, vous présentez les déciles, donc 10% des personnes plus riches, puis 10% des personnes plus pauvres. Il y a quelque chose qui m'interpelle un petit peu parce que nous nous sommes également intéressés en région wallonne pour faire cette disparité interquartile entre les riches et les pauvres. Et nous nous sommes rendus compte dans nos recherches statistiques qu'il y avait quand même pas mal de personnes qui étaient donc exclues du monde du travail et qui percevaient des allocations, mais qui n'étaient pas, qui échappaient à la statistique fiscale. Et étant donné, et ça représentait presque 15% de cette population. Alors je me demande si vous, dans le cadre de votre présentation, votre exposé graphique, si vous en tenez compte aussi de cette population pour monsieur, si vous en tenez compte, parce que si c'est le cas, vous comprenez bien que alors c'est beaucoup plus statistiquement parlant, numériquement parlant, c'est beaucoup plus que celle qu'on pourrait présenter officiellement par rapport à la statistique qui est présentée. Alors j'ai une question aussi pour Madame Otto. Vous avez parlé tout à l'heure notamment des personnes qui bénéficient d'un revenu, qui perçoivent comme source de revenu et qui se trouvent dans des situations de pauvreté. Et nous, on constate par exemple de plus en plus des personnes qui viennent franchir nos portes pour obtenir une aide sociale. Et ce sont, parce que habituellement, ces personnes et ces familles n'ont pas d'emploi, n'ont pas de revenus, mais ici, depuis quelques années, nous nous rendons compte, effectivement, que nous aidons de plus en plus des personnes qui ont des revenus. Et le problème chez nous, c'est que nous constatons qu'il y a parfois des différences significatives d'une année à l'autre, et parfois même d'une saison à l'autre. Il suffit par exemple que nous soyons en période hivernale où les familles ne savent pas remplir leur cuve à mazout ou bien ne savent pas par exemple régler leurs factures énergétiques et que nous devons les aider. Alors pour nous, c'est c'est important évidemment de les aider, mais le problème, c'est qu'on n'arrive pas à quantifier, on n'arrive pas à définir comment ces personnes se caractérisent-elles, comment elles se définissent sociologiquement. On n'a pas vraiment une idée précise. C'est pour cette raison que je voudrais simplement vous poser la question. Si vous avez une idée de la manière dont quel profil type.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
Cédric, do you want to start with those questions? And then
oui. Donc je suis pas sûr d'avoir très bien compris la question de tout à l'heure, mais on y reviendra, c'est ça. Alors juste d'abord donc la question statistique. Alors évidemment que en fait entre les stats et la réalité, il y a toujours un vrai décalage. Ça c'est évident. Je suis le premier à le dire. Le problème en plus évidemment de ma présentation d'aujourd'hui, c'est que il fallait aller assez vite et je voulais pas non plus vous assommer après manger avec toutes ces statistiques-là. Donc voilà, c'était aussi une question de forme, plus précisément. Donc juste un point quand même. J'ai dit que la pauvreté n'augmentait pas de manière... il n'y a pas une explosion de la pauvreté en France. Ça ne veut pas dire qu'il qu'il n'existe pas des situations de détresse, bien au contraire. C'est-à-dire que, évidemment qu'en France, comme dans d'autres pays riches, il y a une pauvreté importante qui existe et qu'il convient de prendre en compte. Là, on était plus sur une réflexion sur l'impact direct de la crise économique et sociale. Et donc, ce que je voulais mettre en avant, c'était surtout que, à la fois pour le niveau de pauvreté, mais aussi pour le niveau de richesse, la crise n'a fait qu'amplifier un phénomène qui existait auparavant. C'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a pas eu d'explosion de la pauvreté et une baisse peut-être du niveau de vie des riches à cause de la crise. C'était ça le point, en fait, surtout.
Very short, thanks for mentioning this, because there is indeed a problem with the measurement statistics. For instance, just to give you an example, the EU ZILC does not necessarily contact people directly, helping them if they, for instance, cannot understand the language, don't read because they are illiterate. So that is one of the points. Or what about homeless people? I know that the socioeconomic panel in Germany is investigating a little bit more, having a look at, is this person still living there? If the person did not reply, does it mean that they are homeless now, for instance? The EU ZILC does not take this into account, and like all the statistics I used are based on the EU ZILC. So there are shortcomings, and it's very important to mention them because there's a high share of people who are actually don't find themselves, they are not represented in the statistics. And another thing I can say from some of our members observe, they are providing food banks. One of the big discussions with the food aid, like the program for the most deprived, currently discussed when speaking about the whole budget for the next multi-annual financial framework. So food bank is, of course, increasingly used by people who are in employment and new social risk, do not have a sufficient income to actually maintain them, to pay for their daily life, including electricity and food. But one more thing, what I can really say is also, it goes even further. You would find more and more people who are indebted coming to some of our members. For instance, we have a Dutch organization, they're helping in financial administration, and they have increasingly people who actually own companies, who have a very well-established income, but still suffer from being unable to pay for their bills, going bankrupt. And then the problem is that state support often comes when it's too late. So our members try to approach them and help them to help themselves very soon again. But really we're facing problems like people who are unable to open the letters because they're so afraid they cannot deal with the whole problem anymore.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, if we could leave it there. We will take your question in the next round if that's okay. You have a comment. Could it wait for the next round? Just because we need to move on with the presentation. Okay. It is important. We'll come back to it. Okay, so Renato is going to speak next on Portugal. We will hear more about food banks, etc., I think, from our speakers from Greece and Ukraine. Renato is from the Centre for Research and Studies in Sociology from the University of Lisbon, and his presentation is going to look at inequality and unemployment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm also working in Observatory of Inequalities in Portugal, and we are connected with this project of the Inequality Watch, that is a European network of European observatories. As we have we had short time. I am going to read because I'm present some data, and this is a way to talk about everything that I want to talk. So. Social inequalities are multidimensional and affect different sectors of society. This communication will present data regarding several dimensions of inequality, and it proceeds as follows. Firstly, it focuses on income inequalities in Portugal and European Union. Then it analyzes the educational level as one of the main inequality drivers in Portugal. And the final part, it discusses the impact of the economic crisis, namely the increasing of unemployment rates and its correlation or relation with inequality trends. Can you change, please? The other one. Since the late 80s, the Portuguese society is characterized by an increase of income inequalities that reached very high levels at the beginning of this century. In recent years, until 2009, the values tended to decrease, although they still remain very high when compared with the European average. Portugal is one of the most unequal countries in Europe, according to the most used income inequality measures. I think most of you know, Gini index, S8020, this is a ratio of total income received by the 20% of the country's population with highest income to that received by the 20% of country's population with lowest income, and S1910, which is an income decile ratio. So you have this all information there. As you can see, the disposable income of the richest 20% in Portugal, the fifth quintile, was 5.7, higher than the income of the poorest first quintile. In Spain, the value of this measure was 6.8, Latvia 6.6, and in Bulgaria 6.5. Regarding Gini index, the most unequal countries are Latvia, Bulgaria, Portugal, Spain, Greece, Romania, and United Kingdom. On the other side, the less unequal ones are Slovenia, Sweden, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Finland, and Netherlands. So the difference between countries in Europe are very, they are very different situations regarding inequalities in Europe. And this, I think it's a problem, and you can discuss this. Next slide provides information about the evaluation of this index S8020. In Portugal, and it shows that since 2003 there has been a decreasing trend of this value measure. And in UA countries, the average value remained stationary in this period. Can change, please. Now I'm going to talk about wages. Wages and salaries are the main driver, one of the main drivers of the total market income inequality. Regarding OECD last calculation, this income component accounts for 75% of the inequality in market income. This situation is particularly evident in Portugal, where a substantial part of the labor force continues to have low wages rates. This information this data is based in Quadros de Pessoal, that is a database that have information about monthly wage of Portuguese companies workers, so mainly private sector. This graphic shows the evaluation of the average monthly earnings by quintile, that is by groups of 20% of workers. The increasing distance between the fifth quintile and the remaining quintiles is remarkable and is growing up since the 80s, as you can see. So this is a very objective picture of how inequality is growing up in Portugal and mainly due to salary inequalities. In 2009, so the difference between the fifth and the rest of the quintiles is in fact remarkable and is growing up. You can change. Besides being an unequal country, Portugal has also income levels well below the European average. So I'm talking now of annual disposable income. In 2010, the mean annual disposable income was in Portugal 9,070 euros, much less comparing with the average in the EU countries, which was more than 15,000 euros. It's annual average. And half or less than half of countries like Denmark, France, Austria, Finland, Netherlands, Sweden, Germany, Belgium, and so on. The same can be said in relation to median available income, which in Portugal stood at almost 80,000 euros, comparing with the average of Europe, which was 13 euros. Okay. Educational inequalities. Portugal is characterized by a huge deficit of schooling, particularly at secondary and tertiary levels. This situation has an important impact in the persistence of social inequalities. I don't know if you are familiar with that classification, but I said O2 represents correspond of lower than secondary, the 3-4 represent secondary education and 5-6 upper secondary education and graduation. One of the factors that have contributed to this level of inequality is educational attainment within Portuguese working population. As it's shown by this slide, almost 60% of the working population has a low level of educational qualification. If you compare with the European countries, it is outstanding the difference between Portugal and the European average. In UA, runs 21%. On the other hand, in Portugal, only 21% have secondary education, as in Europe, this education level reaches particularly half of the labor force. This structural situation has a negative impact on our labor force skills. One of the main consequences of this educational deficit is the imbalance of our labor force structure between a large majority of people with low skills and a minority with high levels of education and training. Can pass, please? Nonetheless, we witness an evolution on this last decade. As you may see in this slide, if you compare the educational attainment between 2003 and 2011, we regard an improvement in the workers' qualification in Portugal. Please, can pass. In this part of my presentation, I will present an exercise, an exploratory exercise that tries to measure the correlation or the relation between three different but interconnected phenomena: poverty, unemployment, and inequality. Of course, this is a risk, but because it used different sources, but I think it is a good exercise to debate and to reflect what's happened in recent years in Europe. In Europe, there is a strong association between inequality and poverty levels. As we can see in this slide, the countries which have a higher risk of poverty or social exclusion are the ones with a higher income inequality. In fact, it's possible to detect two very distinct situations between the southern and some eastern countries, and the other side, the northern and some central ones. As several studies have been demonstrating, it is an error to consider poverty as an independent phenomenon distinct from inequality. This is one thing that I want to underline. On the contrary, they are normally connected, and with this present crisis, this relationship is becoming more relevant. Can change. And like what has happened to the previous correlation, until the beginning of the crisis, there was not possible to establish a relation between inequality and unemployment rate. This graphic that crosses unemployment in 2005 and with S8020, using, of course, different sources. As you may see, the correlation is very weak, or the relation is very weak. In fact, this has been a kind of profile, for instance, in Portugal, that traditionally unemployment is not one of the main drivers of inequality. But this exercise that I made, and using the same correlation for 2011, can change, the picture change. And which is, of course, we have to reflect what's happening. This is a superficial exercise, but I think you can conclude several things. With the crisis and the tremendous growing of unemployment, in some countries something is changing regarding this profile, the traditional profile. This slide shows that in 2011 there is a considerable correlation or relation between inequality and unemployment, which affect mainly the southern countries, Spain, Greece, Portugal, and some of the eastern ones, Latvia, Lithuania, and Bulgaria. This is something quite new in Europe, which needs to be deeply studied and analyzed. But beside this analytical precaution, it is not wrong to say that in several countries unemployment is becoming one of the main inequality drivers. This phenomenon should alert European policymakers regarding the negative impact of the austerity measures that are being applied in some of these countries. The so-called adjustment programs for countries such as Portugal, Ireland, and Greece are causing not only a general pauperization of their population, as they are contributing for the growing of inequality. This is more the same. With using Gini, you can say that the relation maintains. Final remarks. Income inequalities in Portuguese society are comparatively very pronounced. This situation is due to several factors, among which we can highlight the disparities regarding the distribution of educational resources. Indeed, in addition to income inequalities, the lack of education emerged as one of the major factors of inequality in Portugal. This persistent situation has profound impacts on the efficiency of our economy and its capacity to deal in a sustainable way with modern challenges. Investment in human resources is a priority. At the same time, several economic sectors such as construction, retail, trades, restaurants, tourism are failing down. People are reducing their consumption practices, and in general, the quality of life is getting worse. Because of this, young people, including the most qualified and skilled, have no job opportunities, and a considerable part of them are migrating. Unemployment in Portugal the average is 70%, but between young population reaches 40%. The brain drain trends are growing up during these last 3 years, and in the medium term, this will have a tremendous negative impact in our productive capacity. Along with the economic crisis and the austerity measures, unemployment is reaching unprecedented and unsustainable levels. At the European level, we are now witnessing a kind of division between the southern countries and some western ones that have high levels of poverty and unemployment rates, and the northern and central countries, some of them, which have relatively low levels of unemployment. With the escalation of the austerity measures, this division not only will have the risk to increase the gap between the affected countries and the others. But at the same time, this will cause, or can cause, may cause, a continuous growing of inequality in those countries where the unemployment rate is higher. In conclusion, we can see that one of the consequences of this crisis is the escalation of the correlation between three vertices of a triangle composed by poverty, inequality, unemployment and inequality. I think that the European governments and the politicians should have a moral responsibility to put an end to this spiral of austerity that is producing this severe triangle, this perverse triangle. Thank you.
Thank you for that very succinct presentation. I'd agree there's more to be unpicked there, but it really gets at some of what's happening at the Portugal level, a poor and unequal country, and some of the trends that are potentially developing across Europe. Just very quickly, if we could take your comment over there, and maybe one more question, and then we'll move on. Sorry, do you want...
Okay. I am Branko Gerlic from Slovenia. First thing I have to say to Mr. from Portugal that we don't agree that we have such small these claims between the rich and the poor as a statistic. And for my neighbor, yeah, he is right that the statistics aren't correct, but they are awful enough. The official data are awful enough. If the truth is more problematic, it doesn't matter. Then, what was my comment? No, something more for Adeline. The unemployment rate for the young to 25, under 25 years, I think in Spain and Greece is over 50%.
It was the European level. Yeah. It was Europe 20.
Yeah, okay. No, I can't understand. But the problem is precariat. First thing, the precariat involves my generation.
Sorry, we have to keep comments short. I'm sorry. We have to keep comments very short.
Okay, then.
But thank you. That was a good contribution there. And you're right to say that the statistics look awful, but they do underestimate some of the problems that we see. We'll go on now to...
But nevertheless, another time, we should speak much more about precariat.
Okay, perhaps we'll come back to that at the end. And there was one more comment on this side. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Lisbon Social Security. I'm Portuguese too, I heard you. And I have one question. Not forgetting that Portugal is now living with borrowed money, and you spoke so much about the austerity measures. In your opinion, what is the solution then? Thank you.
Stop the austerity measures.
And
Public investment.
With what? With
Create conditions to private investment. Create jobs.
we are living with borrowed money, right?
The money exists. Is not well distributed.
It's very well wide.
Okay, we'll move on with the presentations and we'll talk more about policy at the end. So I'd like to introduce Christina, who is from Médecins, Monde, and she works in Greece. She is responsible for missions inside Greece with their mobile units providing medical care. So she will be able to give us some qualitative evidence on what is happening on the ground, especially in regards to health. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm working to the non-governmental organization Médecins du Monde, Doctors of the World in Greece, in Athens. And I'm going to speak about the work we are doing on the field and how this has changed after the crisis, and also how people living in Greece have been affected by the crisis and the austerity measures. So Médecins du Monde is an international humanitarian organization that provides medical care and aims to improve the access to health care for vulnerable people all over the world. The recent severe financial conditions in Greece have led the organization to the conclusion that activities within Greece, they have to be intensified to meet the massive needs that have been created. For this reason, in Greece MDM we run 5 open clinics, a shelter for asylum seekers, as well as many different programs of medical provision with mobile medical units. With an increasing number of people both left without jobs, but also having to get by on very low salaries, we have to mention that salaries of public officers have been reduced up to 50%, as well as the pensions. And an increasing number of socially excluded people, the demand for some kind of social support is growing, and people have to rely more on NGOs for assistance. According to the latest Eurostat figures, the highest increases in unemployment were registered in Greece, where from 18% in September 2011, this percentage has raised to 26% in September 2012, while at the same time the unemployment rate among young people is 57.6%. That resulted to the fact that in 2011, 31% of the Greek population was considered at risk of poverty or social exclusion. And childhood poverty is also rising. Already in 2010, 19.7% of children living in Greece, they were living in households unable to afford at least 3 out of 9 basic items. So currently, MDM Greece is witnessing a change in the traditionally targeted vulnerable groups, such were undocumented migrants, asylum seekers, homeless people, Roma, and drug users. This change is mainly in the increasing number of Greek citizens who are asking for medical assistance, not only in Athens, but all over Greece. This is shown by all the data collected by 4 of the MDM clinics in Greece. Among the people we take care of, Greek citizens now represent between 6 to 88%. And this rate has incredibly risen in the last years. Based on the first analysis of the data collection in 2012, we could mention that there is an extreme rise of Greek citizens in MDM clinics who are excluded from the national healthcare system, a percentage that rises in some areas up to 36%. Most of our beneficiaries are elderly citizens who are retired and whose pensions have substantially been diminished because of the austerity measures. Doctors of the World has set up specific projects for elderly people more than 65 years old in order to give appropriate medical answer to their specific needs. but also to make sure they have enough to eat. Our teams receive them in our clinics in Athens, in Thessaloniki, and in many areas, and also go to their homes when they cannot come to us. All this could be explained as a consequence of the deterioration of access to healthcare in Greece during the last 3 years. Since October 2010, all public hospitals impose a €5 entrance fee, and this might change to €25 from January 2014, and also further examinations have also to be paid for. This has resulted in a greater number of people being excluded from the services provided by the national healthcare system simply because they cannot afford to pay. Furthermore, pharmacies often lack supplies of medicines and demand to pay cash up front for drugs, even for people who shouldn't pay, as the state owes to the pharmacies a lot of money. Many children remain without vaccination as they had to be paid for, and this of course puts their health at risk and public health too, but also without the necessary vaccination, children cannot go to school. For all these reasons, MDM has to respond to an increasing number of requests concerning medical examination for children, as well as vaccination not only in the schools in isolated areas, but also in the center of Athens. Of course, the access to healthcare has also become worse for undocumented migrants. According to a new regulation, since 2nd of May 2012, public services, local authorities, and social security institutions don't have to provide services to undocumented migrants and third-country nationals. There is only an exception for hospitals in cases of emergency. The right to access necessary health care is now also limited for refugees, asylum seekers, international protection beneficiaries, and persons who have been granted a residence permit for humanitarian reasons. The unprecedented recession has been politically exploited by xenophobic extreme right-wing groups. In absence of a formal government monitoring of the incidents, a broad civil society coalition set up a racist violence recording network. During the first 9 months of 2012, the network documented 87 incidents of racist violence against refugees and migrants. 83 occurred in public spaces like squares, streets, and public transport. The majority of these incidents concerns physical attacks against foreigners, while the types of crimes are mainly severe bodily injury and assault. In 84 out of 87 incidents, the victims consider the fact of their being foreigners the reason for the attack. They believe they became targets either because of their color or due to any other characteristic revealing the fact that they were not natives. However, the true extent of the violence remains unknown due to underreporting. Perpetrators of such attacks operate in groups undisturbed in a systematic and organized manner. The victims have reported that the persons usually wear black clothes. Undocumented migrants who want to report an attack to the police, they have to pay €150 to file an official complaint, so it's extremely difficult for them. In the beginning of February 2013, the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Nils Muizhnieks, expressed his solidarity to MDM Greece after Golden Dawn members demonstrated in front of the MDM clinic in Perama. This happened just some days after he had urged the Greek authorities to tackle racism, racially motivated violence, and police misconduct. Furthermore, our data show that mental health seemed particularly damaged in Greece in 2012, where 50% of patients had a bad or very bad mental health. This, of course, may be linked with the economic crisis, since some Greek surveys have shown the recent and dramatic increase in suicides. All these data have been given during our meetings with Mr. Nils Muizhnieks, but also with the European Commissioner Cecilia Malmström, the Libe Committee, and Mr. François Crépeau from United Nations Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants. Concerning the funding, there have been marked some important changes. There is no more of financial support coming from the Greek state, but at the same time, we have seen the rise of solidarity coming from the people living in Greece and some Greek foundations. We as MDM Greece, we refuse any funding which is exclusively given for Greek nationals and excluding foreigners. We also receive support from MDM International Network. We have had donations in money and also in kind, like medical equipment and medical supplies. Finally, of course, money is very important, but what helps us most is to see all these young people coming to us in order to volunteer in our actions. This really corresponds to our value that we go wherever people in need are. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Quite a troubling account of what's going on there in Greece, and it really highlights what happens once the state retreats and the pressure is put on NGOs and others to come in and pick up the slack. It's a very difficult situation, I've heard, in terms of funding, in terms of doing this job. Just moving on quickly, I think now to Andrij. He's from Caritas, the president of Caritas Ukraine, who delivers services in health and social care. Thank you.
So I'm very grateful to be here in the Council of Europe, because it's an organization, a political platform, which looks over the borders of the European Union and looks at the whole continent. And what you see if you are looking outside of the European Union is not much more pleasant than what you see inside. And it's more, maybe even worse. And actually, I have to report about the country which is a transition country. And as such, it is in the state which was described by what Antonio Gramsci, who was mentioned today, as a state where a situation is which died already and a new situation was not born by now. And this is the situation of my country, of Ukraine. The old Soviet system, also the social protection system of the Soviet Union, died, is not anymore in existence. But there is no new system in existence. There is no political will to build up a system. And this is the situation in which an organization like mine, like Caritas Ukraine, is dealing. When I'm looking at the development of my organization, and it was an organization which was built up in the beginning of the 90s in Ukraine, when the Soviet Union collapsed, and till now, we can see what happened in the country in the social sphere. In the beginning, in the early 90s, we were engaged in distributing humanitarian aid to the people who suffered most of the transformation in the country. And we built up soup kitchens for people who were in need, just to help them to survive. And then in the end of the 90s, we could start with developmental work. We could build up some structures of social services, and we concentrated in the most important field where the biggest need was to help elderly people who were alone, who had no family, to survive in the situation, and to take care, another priority of our work, to take care about children, the so-called street children. And it was interesting. The elderly people, we wanted to bring social services to elderly home care services. They said, we don't need home care services, we need food, first of all, to survive. So we had to bring them food. With the street children, there was another problem. We wanted to build up centers where they could come to us, but they didn't come to us. So we had to go to them. We built up mobile centers to help them on the street to survive. But they did not need food. They need support. They need to have a future, a perspective for a future. And we tried to give them this. Just to have a picture of street children in Ukraine, till to the year of 2004, there were about 120,000 street children in Ukraine. And it said it's the Latin American type of street children, which have no connection to the society at all. They live on the street, and from the age of 4 years till 16 years. You could see 4-year-old children, and they were really visible in the streets, 4-year-old children who sniffed glue And you can imagine what were the perspective for these children. After 16 years, they disappeared from the street. And we were thinking that they either came into prostitution or in the criminal world, but they were not anymore visible in the street. After 2004, in 2004, I would say, was in Ukraine a time where many things changed. This was the year of the Orange Revolution, and many social problems were tackled. Actually, after 2004, or in 2004, during the Orange Revolution, we saw a phenomenon we did not see before. The whole 90s and the beginning of the new millennium. There was the time when solidarity in Ukraine was born. During the Orange Revolution, people helped each other. People who came to the revolution, to Kyiv, to the Ukrainian capital, they were taken up in the families of other people, and the people could share with them, but they could share only because they had something to share. So this was economically an interesting point. People had more than they needed to survive. This was 2004, and it was a period from 2004 to 2008 which gave the people a perspective for the future. And this was also the time where an enormous phenomenon in Ukraine was reduced. Actually, the third priority in which Caritas Ukraine works, this was labor migration. From the 90s till now, we estimate that there are over 5 million labor migrants abroad from Ukraine. Most of them irregular migrants, most of them in Southern European countries, like Portugal, Spain, Greece, like Italy. Poland? Yes, also Poland. And actually, the biggest labor migration is in Russia. Over 2 million people. 2 million are in European Union countries as irregular migrants. And actually, they helped to survive the families in Ukraine. This was one of the important things, how they could survive. What happened after 2008? Let's start with the labor migrants. They did not come back. And now we heard the unemployment numbers in Portugal or Spain or Italy. And we are thinking what's going on. So the perspective for them staying in countries where they can't find work as an irregular migrant is for them more interesting than coming back to Ukraine. Because in Ukraine in this time happened something. We had a new government, we had a new president, and we started next to the social problems which the country saw, we had also political problems. We have the problems of becoming a more and more authoritarian state. And this is a complex which shows the whole situation in Ukraine. We have a political elite which maybe best is defined by the situation of our parliament. We have a parliament of 450 parliamentarians, of whom about more than 400 are dollar millionaires. We have actually a feudal state where only the rich people, as the representatives of business corporations, are ruling and only taking the interest what is important for them. We have a country where the son-in-law of a former president became, during the presidency of his father-in-law, a billionaire. The same thing happens today with the family of the now president of Ukraine. And we have a country where about 60 charter flights every weekend go to the beautiful cities of the European Union with the elite of Ukraine, who are ruling the country but living abroad. All the families have their houses, their villas in Switzerland, in France, in Italy, on beautiful places, and they are coming as commuters to Ukraine to rule the country and to exploit it. This is the situation in which we have to work. And now, after 2008. Again, in our home care services, we have to bring the people food because they can't afford it anymore. We have a situation where the pensioners have a pension of about 120 euros a month in a country where the food prices are the same like in Western European capitals. And now, what is the solution for this? The political parties are systems which are working for the big business conglomerates. The only future, and if you build up a party, it will be immediately incorporated in the system. The biggest problem in the country is the corruption, generally. Most of the elite is living from the state budget and from the kick-offs of the state finances. They're living from that. And if you want to go into the system, you will be immediately corrupted by this system. So the only future we can see, the only way we can come out of this problem is civil society. And there is a positive thing. What I'm seeing now is civil society is ready to organize itself, and it starts not at the top, but at the bottom. And we're trying to do it on the local way, on the communities. We try to influence, we try to organize the communities, influence communal policies, and go from the bottom up to the top. And this is our big perspective. I would finalize my short presentation about a not very pleasant situation in my country with another thing. Actually, this morning in Brussels was a presentation of a new study of Caritas Europa, which I think just thematizes what we are speaking here. It was a study about the disturbing levels of poverty and deprivation in 5 European Union countries, which Caritas Europa made in Greece, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, and Spain, and to show the impact of the European crisis and an in-depth examination of the impact that current policies are having on people in these 5 states. And it concludes, actually, it was based on the experience of Caritas with people, working with people who experience poverty. And its principal conclusion is that the policy of prioritizing austerity is not working, and that an alternative approach should be adopted. And now we can come to your question, actually, how should it be done? And to the question, is there enough money to do things like that? Let me go back to my situation, my country. There are billions who are going every year out of the country to offshore paradises, and this has to stop. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. It really highlights the importance, when we think about inequality, about the impacts that then has on our politics as well. And it's not just in Ukraine. We know it's perhaps not extreme, but in the UK, our cabinet is, again, full of very wealthy people from very wealthy backgrounds. Corporations and that kind of behaviour happens across the world. Really, just to quickly sum up what we've heard there, of course, these are different countries, there are different things that are happening, but there are some common trends. And the first thing to remember is that when we started this crisis, a lot of us were more unequal than we were 20, 30 years ago. So we went into this crisis more unequal than we had been for a generation. And then most of us, to different extents, and are in different phases of this, are facing austerity measures, and those are having very big impacts. What's interesting is to look at how employment and unemployment was affected during the recession. Actually, we didn't, for the most part, cross-European study found that most countries did not see unemployment fall as much as they have in previous recessions during just between 2007 and 2009 because of the safety net, because the safety net was working. But after that point, we had austerity, of course, and austerity has undermined the safety net. And it has worked to then to cause the economic catastrophes that we see, which then, of course, have many social consequences. And we do continually also have the rise in in-work poverty. And even countries where there hasn't been such an impact on employment due to austerity measures, there has been an increase in flexible contracts. There has been, wages have been held back. So we do see these trends across Europe. Now, we're doing okay on time, so I want to use the rest of the time really to set out what can happen next. And if you could just go to the end slide of this presentation. It's in this presentation, the last slide, talking about action. And these are some of the things that I was thinking about in terms of when we're thinking about action, are we thinking about cure? Of course, we have a lot of immediate problems, so what do we do to address that? What do we do to prevent the impact of the crisis further? We think about what, why, who, so what policy, why this policy in particular? Who, so is this the EU level, is this national government, is this about grassroots action? And think about really where you fall on in terms of whether we should stop the cuts. And there's obviously a bubbling conversation that needs to come up about that. And just quickly on a poll on that, just across the room, I wonder if you could put your hand up if you agree that we need to end austerity. Agree? End austerity, so end the cuts. There's different arguments for that. So some people would say, so Keynesians would say that actually the austerity is putting us, it's going to make growth harder, so it's going to make it more difficult for us to raise the money to pay back austerity. So I just wanted to ask quickly. So it's about a third, I would say. So more than a third. Okay, sorry, my eyesight's not that great, obviously. Okay, so I just want to start really. I just want to take. I know that we've had some policy responses across to do with social protection and building a safety net, to do with taxes. We had a question earlier about fairness. About the need for social solidarity, so potentially what you would do around campaigns on that, and the need to think about grassroots level up action. So if I could just quickly perhaps just go through the presenters and just if you could just in a sentence say what you would do first, I think that will open up the discussion, and then I'd really like to invite everyone to engage. So to start with Adeline.
I'll try my best. Yeah, well, a cure, no, definitely not. I think we did that a lot, and in the past it didn't really help. And I'm actually fed up with looking only at the contribution that others can make, like the poor or the people who have to be mobilized. So I think we should really look at the long-term impact. If we don't invest that money now, we will pay a double, a triple, or whatever sum back in terms of health, in terms of security. And actually, the highest price to lose is we live in one society, and it's fallen apart because we are giving up, and that's the why, actually. If we don't do that now, we actually give up what was helping to build our societies, the core values, which is reciprocity and solidarity. And everyone has to contribute, and not only blaming one group and playing them against each other, saying they have to be mobilized, they are in work. We should go far away from merit as the only way to look at this is a contribution to society. Who are you? Who is anyone to judge on what is a contribution to this society? We all live in it. We all should contribute to it with all the potentials we have. So I really prefer it going in terms of back from merit towards cooperation and participation for human self-fulfillment, for social cohesion. And the who, well, all levels, everyone. So it's not just the state responsibility, it's also not the individual. We all are contributing to the rich, the wealth, and the risks of these societies, and we all have to kind of find solutions to live together here.
Yeah, Cédric.
Bon, changer le monde en une phrase, c'est un peu compliqué. Je voudrais quand même dire deux choses. Je pense aussi qu'il faut mettre en avant la notion de solidarité et sortir d'une vision individualiste qu'est la vision méritocratique, encore une fois, où on est dans cette vision à la fois pour les pauvres comme pour les riches, où en fait, si nous sommes dans telle situation, c'est parce que nous avons trop travaillé, pas assez travaillé, etc. Donc il faut au contraire rappeler l'apport de la société en général et construire une société qui permette à chacun de se construire un avenir de se construire une vie. Et la deuxième chose que je voudrais dire, et après j'arrête très rapidement, c'est que je crois que les mesures d'austérité, par exemple, eh bien, illustrent une volonté de perpétuer un passé, illustrent une forme de crispation, une incertitude à l'égard du futur. Et à mon avis, il est nécessaire aujourd'hui, alors ça va être très beau ce que je vais dire, et ça a peut-être peu d'impact pratique, mais il est nécessaire finalement de s'inscrire dans le présent et de penser le futur qu'on veut construire. De faire cet effort, non pas seulement de perpétuer le passé, le système qu'on a du passé, mais au contraire d'inventer un nouveau système, et peut-être un nouveau système qui serait plus indépendant, encore une fois, du marché du travail, et qui se focaliserait plus essentiellement sur les droits humains, sur la préservation des droits humains, sur la protection des droits humains, pour permettre à chacun, eh bien, encore une fois, de se construire un avenir.
Okay, sorry, I should have said that we want something that is, it'd be good if you could say something, instead of something more general, say specific policy, because I'm trying to make it a bit more controversial here. Of course, we would agree that we need to think about safety nets, etc., and solidarity, but what would you do? What would be your concrete policy action? Just because I have to say this all tomorrow, so I don't want to make it up by myself tonight. I want to hear it from you. Thank you. So just really very quickly, just one policy. And Adeline, you didn't say a policy as well, so could you just say that quickly? Sorry.
Okay, really, I'm sorry, I have no solution for you and for us, but...
Well, you spoke about
oui, yeah, ouais. Je pense que ce qui est important pour cette notion de solidarité, c'est non seulement d'augmenter les taxes pour les plus riches, mais de sortir, c'est ce que vient de dire la personne qui parlait avant moi, ne pas, pardon, j'ai oublié ton nom, mais de ne pas seulement se focaliser sur les riches, ne pas critiquer les riches comme on a pu critiquer les pauvres. Non, de faire cet effort vraiment tous ensemble et encore une fois, de mettre en avant cette notion de solidarité, cette notion de vie en communauté, finalement. Et donc pour ça, eh bien, il faut augmenter, voilà, je le dis très simplement, augmenter dans les revenus, donc avec évidemment les revenus dont chacun dispose, mais d'augmenter les impôts pour chacun, d'augmenter la participation pour chacun. Rappeler cette importance de la société dans nos vies en général. Voilà. Donc c'est pas très pratique, je suis désolé, mais je fais vraiment ce que je peux. Mais d'augmenter les impôts en général.
Just literally one line.
Progressive taxation, universal social security systems with target support as to be topped up with, education and lifelong learning, and monitoring and really social budgeting. We have gender budgeting, social budgeting, and it has to be monitored. We have objectives with the European 2020 strategy, and no one is really willing to work towards them. Obviously, they're just like something on paper. We should work towards them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, to be concrete, sorry. Stop the austerity measures. They are wrong. They are not working. Regarding Portugal, renegotiate the program and extend the terms of the debt and the payment of the debt. Increment public investment. This is a myth. It's impossible to solve the situation without any public investment. Create conditions to increase private investment using the European funds. Have more flexibility in the public deficit limit. I think this make no sense to have the same deficit to countries that have completely different social and economic situations. In Portugal, I made this kind of proposal to connect the level of the deficit to the employment rate. And why 3%? 3%, why? In Portugal, we need investment, public investment, so I think that should have, in Portugal, Greece, and it should have more flexibility in the public deficit. So, and this idea to connect the limit of deficit, public deficit to an employment rate could be an option. So, very concrete.
Great. So on the ground.
So I think I agree with Renato. Austerity measures also don't work in Greece. They make the situation even worse. And speaking mainly about Greece, I think at least we have to ensure an equal access to healthcare for everyone, because health is not a luxury, it's not a privilege, it's a human right.
Yes, I can, from an outside position, give an advice to the European Union countries. I mean, I agree also with concerning the austerity measures, and because they're not working. And I think we should put the energy which is put into this system into other alternative systems. That's an important thing. And it's very important that we understand if we are going in one direction and work on it, we can achieve something. If we are going in the wrong direction, we do a lot in this wrong direction, and that's the bad thing. You know, we have actually to change the direction and put all the energy and creativity into other and alternative ways. Just one moment, which for me is important. I mean, for Ukraine, what is needed now is to build up a social system. We have to remodel the system, and there's one very important thing, because you said don't speak about these general things. We discussed this system today on the basis of values. What values has the human being in a country? How do we look at these people? What rights do they have? And on what are these rights based? It's the anthropology which is behind it. And if we are looking at the European Union countries, at a role model for the development of our country, we are a little bit confused, because we see in the European Union now these very pragmatical approaches in countries which were built up and came to a certain wealth through value-based approaches. And we should go back to these values.
Thank you. Thank you for picking me up on that point about needing a normative framework, or having those values that are placed there to overarch specific policies. So if we could open up now, I'm really interested in hearing from you about policies in particular, as well as they're not just national policies, if they're policies at other geographical levels. Yes, sir.
Yes, Zagorski from Poland. I have a question to Mr. Rio. Do you know any estimation? How much money can you get taxing this upper 10% of richest people? Do you think that it will be enough to do anything on a mass scale? I know that these are terrible people, greedy people, immoral people. I agree with you. But is that the macroeconomic and macro-social solution? I do not believe. You propose the strengthening the progression taxation for everybody. It means you want to tax more heavily the middle class, which we were told today is in the same situation since many, many years, and it's rather declining than growing. So you want to push them down. Yes, you want to tax them. You want to take them the earning. Okay, all right. So the first question is taxation enough? Second, I don't argue with any things, with any postulates of social action. They are correct. They are needed, but they are far not enough. We are all here either social activists or social scientists. I did not hear any economists speaking there. What has happened after the first big crisis in the 30s? We got Keynes, we got Galbraith, and they were addressing not the results of the crisis. They were addressing the causes of it. And causes of it is a functioning of economy. And if we do not, those people who now get rich without any reason and without any use to anybody are getting rich not because they are now became immoral. They did not change. People nature did not change. What has changed? Changed the functioning of the economy, of the economic system. We were taught about this financialization of economy and so on. And nobody has addressed here the problem of how to change the functioning, the pattern of functioning of the economy, which is the cause of the illness. You address the remedy for what? To redistribute, to deal with the results. Okay, we got ill persons, so we have to, yes, all right.
Thank you. Those are great points on taxation and whether it's the panacea. I share your frustrations with our focus always on taxation. Of course, progressive taxation is important. We do need to think about how to address the structural causes within the economy. So we'll hear back from that. I want to take another 2 questions and then we'll come back to the panel. Yes, thank you.
My name is Michelle Murphy. I'm from Social Justice Ireland, and we produced the Caritas report that Andrij was talking about. And so we've also produced a discussion document specific to Ireland called a Framework for Solidarity and Recovery, designed to get a discussion going on what sort of Ireland we want, you know, if and when we get out of the programme. But just to look at policy specifics, the report we produced for Caritas just has a few in there on a European level. So I've just picked out a couple. One of them is that economic and social policies should be integrated at a much greater extent at European level, because what you see now, especially as part of the Europe 2020 strategy, is that the countries who are in programmes, in terms of the national reform programmes and the national social reports, they're more or less being ignored, and you're being told to implement the austerity policies and forget about your targets for those programmes. So that would be one. Another would be for social monitoring should be put in place for all programme countries. And that the European Union itself must involve civil society organisations and all stakeholders in governance going forward. And that the actions within this report, they need to be adopted now. We've waited long enough, you know, to deal with this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a question just here. Don't worry, we'll come back for a second round.
So, Fintan Farrell, Director of the European Anti-Poverty Network. I appreciated very much the input from the Ukraine, and I hope it doesn't have to get that bad in every European country before we can tell the truth, because corruption is rife in every European country, including Western European countries, and corruption was very much at the heart of the crisis in Ireland. About 15 loans and about 25 people involved. At the heart of the crisis there. Corruption in Austria, corruption in Sweden, corruption everywhere. So this is a huge issue. I think some of the questions will just be answered by new actions at local level. And I think this, and people creating new systems to engage people at the local level. So I really think that's a lot of the solutions. But I want to concentrate, I think, on the question of the economic questions. Too much of the economy is in false economy. And that is facilitated by hedge funds and by derivative trading. And we should have an orderly break-up. That's what we should have cooperation at European level, is to be able to deal with these sorts of situations, because no country can do them on their own. And we should have now working together to have an orderly break-up of the system of hedge funds and the system of derivative trading, which is where the money is that's needed to be able to protect and not have to have the austerity measures, which are the disaster for everybody. So it's that is one of the key things, that we also need to look at what's the return on investment that's happening through the systems. Because if they're going to look for 20-25% return, it's unsustainable. So we have a form of capitalism now that is unsustainable, and so we need to start as protecting our societies by setting limits on the sort of returns that can come from investment through that sort of system to levels which are sustainable. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's 5 or 10%, but once you start to go over 10% demand of return on these sorts of systems, then that's where the wealth goes, and that's why the public wealth escapes into private wealth. So it's a total reordering of an unsustainable capitalist system. I'm not saying capitalism, but the unsustainable form of it that we have now. And that's what we would need to have the countries working together to do. But no country is prepared to do it on their own, and the European Union or any other system doesn't seem to be ready to take it on. And for as long as that's there, we will continue to lose confidence in our political systems. And that's very dangerous, because then you're left with Golden Dawn. And we've heard what the colleague from Greece has told us. And that's the absolute situation we're in. We're fighting not just poverty and inequality, not just the economy, but we're fighting for the protection of our democratic systems.
Great, that was a great sum up there. Actually, I think, yeah. I'm really enjoying hearing from the crowd. I think that what we'll do is carry on taking interventions from you guys and then potentially just have some reflections right at the end. So I know there's right at the back, if you want to, and then we'll look around.
No, it doesn't work. I agree that we cannot come out from the crisis without investment. I am more skeptical about the idea that must be public investment, because for doing a public investment we need public money, and the only way for getting public money is just or taxation or convincing people to borrow money to the state, and then this implies the increase of the interest rate that afterwards the state should pay. From my point of view, the problem is private investment and the fact that the financiarization of economy push private investment toward financial investment and not real concrete economic investment. And then the simple question is it possible to imagine a taxation system, just an European taxation system, because we cannot imagine a world taxation system, able to force investment towards a real economy and not a financial economy?
I'm interested there to say about where public investment comes from, where there's not public money if you don't use taxation. And something we haven't talked about is businesses, and there's some talk there about reform of business and what you could do. One of the things that we say in the UK, for instance, you could have a wage ratio within companies so that you're ensuring that people are remunerated fairly throughout the company. Okay, can we go, if we could just go on? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Sigas. I'm from the Netherlands, and I would answer to my colleague from Poland that I fully agree with him. The economic system is not working very well, and that brings us in the problems. We made all the things we made and we consume practically. We let them produce in China. And the multinationals, the global financial system, I have to say, that produce in China because they can produce in China much cheaper as in Europe, and that's where the capital goes. It goes where it is cheapest to get profit. And there's nothing, no one is to blame for it, but the system is to blame for it because they make the labor cost relations between China and United States or Europe too steep. They have to heave up the labor subsidizing the labor cost in Europe and in the United States through giving to people a basic income. That will bring the labor cost in Europe far lower as they are now, and they will bring back the work. What we have brought to China will bring the work back to Europe, and it will poverty will be defined out, and also the question of the full employment will be defined out as we give to the people an income that is sufficient to live on. And we have a purpose in the European Union and also in the world to diminish poverty, and we can do it in our rich world in Europe in the first place, and we bring the world again, the world economic system again, to a balancing system more
Okay.
as it is now. It's
Thank you.
to show imbalance that it will destroy the world when it goes on.
Okay, thank you for that. Do people here know what the basic income idea is? Does everyone understand that? I don't know if it potentially needs to be explained very briefly. I don't know if Louise is still here.
I'm Stanislas Jourdan from France, and I'm coordinator of the French Basic Income Network. So I think I can answer that question. A basic income is different than a minimum income or something else. Basic income is an income that everyone gets, every citizen. It's a right as a citizen that we can live on. And this is not as we have currently in Europe or in many welfare systems, because basic income is not means tested. You get it whether you work or not, whether you are a family, whatever is your professional family situation. You get it because you live. And this is a proposal that is gaining traction, especially in Germany, Switzerland, and France now. So, and I take the opportunity to mention that we are about to launch a European Citizen Initiative in the next weeks. And you can go to basicincome2013.eu. And if we get 1 million signatures within the 12 months, we'll have a hearing at the European Commission. I'm done.
Okay, great. And there's, you can hear more about basic income tomorrow morning at a session, I believe. Are there other interventions? Are there other policy ideas or contributions? Thank you.
Hello, I'm James Wallbank. I'm from Sheffield in the UK. I'd like to just reflect on a question of leadership. Change can only come from people with positive morale, with a feeling of confidence that change can happen. And what I would like to ask is, are our leaders building positive morale in the poor, the unemployed, or are they building a sense of fear? It seems to me that fear is the opposite of confidence, of positive morale. And there's an awful lot of leadership talk that spreads fear.
Are there any more interventions before we take final? Yes, sir.
Alors, c'est bon, on m'entend là? Alors, je m'appelle Mourad, je suis de Paris, comité des sans-logis. En fait, ça m'a interpellé ce qui se passe en Grèce, en fait, parce que ce qui se passe en Grèce, c'est un petit échantillon en Europe. Ce qui peut se passer en Europe, en fait. Parce que ce que les Grecs vivent actuellement, ça peut toucher toute l'Europe demain. Moi, à mon avis, parce que des fois on parle politique, mais on oublie le mot politique, c'est un mot grec, c'est le paradoxe de tout ça, parce que on parle politique et on sait même pas gérer un Europe, parce que politique c'est gérer une ville en fait, de s'organiser et de savoir vivre tous ensemble. Par rapport, bon, il y a une période de crise, on est dedans depuis 2008, on va pas s'en sortir en claquant les doigts. Ceci dit, moi je crois, à mon avis, je suis pas un spécialiste en économie, mais délocaliser, il faut arrêter de délocaliser en dehors de l'Europe. Il faudrait garder nos travail pour le travailleur moyen et les salaires. Il faudrait qu'il y ait une égalité des salaires partout en Europe, parce qu'il y a pas mal d'égalité en Europe. Moi, je vais bien, mais le copain tout à l'heure il parlait de l'Ukraine, où il y a j'ai compris qu'il y a une bande de mafia, quoi. Ils viennent dépouiller le pays, le soir ils sortent, quoi. Et ça, c'est malheureux pour les Ukrainiens, mais par rapport à la Grèce, moi, à mon avis, l'Europe, il a assez les reins solides pour payer cette dette qu'ils ont, les Grèces, et repartir du bon pied pour les copains grecs, c'est tout, voilà. Je crois l'argent, il y est, il faut le sortir. Maintenant, c'est pas aux citoyens européens de payer ou d'augmenter les impôts européens. Voilà, merci.
So is there something there about cancelling debt? Am I right in thinking that? About maybe cancelling some of the debt that we see, actually part of it has already been cancelled, but that's one way to move on. Are there any other interventions before we take final reflections? Yeah.
Yes, very briefly, and David from here as a consultant in the Council of Europe. kind of provocative, but I want to spend 30 seconds in defending austerity measures, or the word austerity, just to be provocative. I would like to stress that is not the austerity itself the problem, according to me, is how it is implemented. So austerity is a way to save money from the point of view of the budget of the state. If we cut on military spending, if we cut on the expenditure that relates to, I don't know, the increasing bureaucracy or we rationalize the tiers, the levels of the administration, we make it easier for people to have access to services, it could be even something good. So austerity has to be a chance for us to reorganize and diminish the amount of budget that the state may need to run. What is the problem is how the government have decided to implement austerity. So the lack of progressivity in the measure that they include. We have a key example in Europe, Iceland. Tomorrow we will have a member from the Icelandic government here. And they implemented also austerity measures, but cutting pensions, the highest one. They implemented austerity measures. They call it austerity, but their austerity is completely different than our Mediterranean version of austerity. So let's not focus on the word austerity, but on the way it is implemented.
Okay, thanks for that. I guess the point with austerity is that it's become to mean that because in so many places it is implemented. There was a graph that I didn't get to show in my presentation that would basically show that in the UK, if you look at every single budget since we had a new government in 2009, every single budget has been regressive. So they have to produce the numbers. They hide the numbers at the back of the annex of the budget report. And every time they've been regressive. So if you were to implement austerity in a way that was more progressive, you'd probably have very different outcomes. I know I just want to pick on you, sorry, because I know that you said earlier you had a bit of a disagreement, and I'd like to just ask what your opinion is on what needs to happen.
Not disagreement. I do not know any human being who likes austerity. I do not believe that any person in the government likes to rule with austerity. It would be much more easier not to do these measures or fulfill the program. I agree with what everyone said, and all people, not in Portugal but in other countries, they are suffering in their houses, and I believe that without the organizations on the field, it would be not possible to survive to this situation. And that's exactly the question. Austerity measures and the program is supposed to be an income to change position. It must be an opportunity to do and go further, changing the system. I was hearing Ukraine speaking about having 400 and more people in the parliament. In Portugal, we are already shocked by having 118. And what was speaked after, it was not about the disagreement, is in this point right now, we have no opportunity for doing public investment. Right now, that is not possible. And I think that these measures are meant that in the near future we can do that, but right now that's not the possibility. And now some solutions for the crisis. I believe that was, in the morning this was spoken already. I'm in the government now, but I worked many years in the social institutions. I believe that it's time taking the austerity to really sharing the resources on the field. For instance, we go to some local, and my district is Lisbon, and everywhere we have not only the public institutions, but the private ones giving food. Everyone is giving food on the field. You cannot believe, for example, in Christmas, how many food baskets one family was given. I met one family that received more than 12 in the same day. So I believe we have to work together. I believe the responsibility of this situation is not only for the government or for the institutions, it's really for everyone. And sharing resources, I believe, is one very good way to get out of this situation.
Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, on the point about austerity, that some people, no government would want that. I think for governments that don't like big state and don't really and would like to roll back the state, actually austerity is a method by which they can roll back the state. Do we have any final comments from people on the panel? Yeah, do you want to start with Adeline and we'll work our way down?
4 comments. I agree that we quickly went back to trying to get back to normality or normalcy, and that, again, we are repeating the mistakes which actually brought us where we are now. So I can see, and I agree with Fintan, that actually we should look much broader on what brought us into the crisis. Do we just not continue exactly repeating what we did before in austerity, in the sense that, of course, we should have, we cannot wait. We cannot wait until growth is back or employment is back to then finally fight poverty. We have to do it at the same time. And I agree with you that austerity is, as such, could be discussed, but smart spending, for me, as it is now written in the social investment package, is just not the solution in the way they are. It's more towards efficiency, but actually by getting people out of the benefits, like, reducing the take-up rate. Second point, we are again looking at short-term profit maximization, and that is again the same thing. It repeats. It's the mistakes which brought us into the crisis. And there comes the point towards real economy. Of course, we should use private investors, but I see a certain development, and I'm afraid of it actually. Private investment would be good, but what I see is that we then look at what's the social return on investment, which is okay, but measuring social outcome. And then we are back to defining what's positive and trying to measure everything. And I'm a little bit afraid, because what I've seen from the Commission is going for easy, quantifiable data back into labor market success. Everything else that cannot be measured is not worth to be invested in. If we can develop better indicators, but I'm afraid that we are not on the side to say, well, actually have a look at things that are very difficult to measure and still worth to be invested in.
Sorry, if you just round up. Sorry.
Fourth point, the whole union we are living in is a union of trust. And so I can absolutely agree, it was said, status insecurity creates competition, creates fear and distrust, and it's a game theory thing that if we continue with this, we will break up. So we need a union of trust, and the social choice is a collective choice. It's not a natural catastrophe. It's just a question of choice.
Okay. Je voudrais revenir sur cette histoire de taxes. Pourquoi est-ce qu'on demanderait à tout le monde de payer? La question essentielle, à mon avis, c'est que fait-on de ces impôts, que fait-on de ces taxes? C'est ça la vraie question. Et à mon avis, à mon sens, ce qu'il faut en faire, eh bien, encore une fois, c'est de construire une société dans laquelle l'accès aux biens fondamentaux, eh bien, serait finalement tout à fait gratuit, tout à fait... voilà, l'idée, c'est qu'il n'y aurait plus aucun obstacle à l'accès à l'éducation, à la santé, etc. Et donc, du coup, il n'est pas absurde de demander à chacun, même d'ailleurs une part symbolique, mais de demander à chacun de contribuer à cette société-là. Et puis, je ne crois pas qu'il soit une bonne solution, encore une fois, de stigmatiser les riches, mais pour autant de rappeler d'où vient leur richesse. Leur richesse, elle vient évidemment de la société dans laquelle ils ont grandi, tout simplement. Warren Buffett lui-même le dit, c'est-à-dire que s'il n'était pas né aux États-Unis, il n'aurait sans doute pas pu obtenir la richesse qu'il a obtenue aujourd'hui. Et donc c'est pour ça qu'il trouve nécessaire de redistribuer aujourd'hui. Bien. La deuxième chose importante, c'est qu'à mon avis, nous avons les ressources financières nécessaires pour investir socialement, pour faire ce que nous voulons faire, en demandant, et encore une fois, à chacun de contribuer à sa juste part, et demander plus aux plus riches également. Il faut s'interroger sur un point, à mon avis, essentiel. La croissance économique que nous avons accumulée depuis déjà de nombreuses années. On l'a accumulée pourquoi? On l'a accumulée pour s'enrichir, on l'a accumulée pour construire un système social qui bénéficie à tous. à mon avis, c'est la deuxième solution, évidemment. Et donc, au lieu peut-être de rechercher à nouveau cette croissance, de rechercher à nouveau d'augmenter l'activité industrielle, peut-être posons-nous un moment et demandons-nous ce que nous pouvons faire de cette richesse accumulée au fil des années.
Okay. I don't understand what's the meaning of progressive austerity. I prefer the concept of redistribution. Redistribution between capital income and wage income, labor income. Redistribution within wage and salaries. Redistribution as a way to rationalize resources and wastes. If progressive austerity means redistribution, I agree. But I think it's not the sense that you proposed. A public investment. This idea that public investment is a bad thing and private investment is a good thing. I think that I'm not an economist, but I think the economy don't work like this. And I think that, for instance, to have a good environment, a good framework for private investment, is important to have also good public investment. They are connected. So I think this is common sense. The taxation is increasing in Portugal, but the money from this taxation is not for public investment, is not for public service, is using to paying the debt and paying the austerity. So, of course, they are margin for public investment. Using the European funds and flexibility in the public deficit, I think they are certain ways to, in fact, have public investment. And I don't understand why it's possible to solve this problem without public investment. Look at what's happened in the United States, and they are not radicals. There is a relationship between corruption and inequality. Of course, it's different to demonstrate by numbers, but several studies demonstrate that is happening. So most of these countries are witness in a growing of inequality and corruption. These two phenomena are connected in some part. I think we must look at them as the same. They are linked. So.
Thank you. Yes, there is a lot of evidence to show that actually the way that inequality and wealth at the top then feeds into our political system. There's a causal connection there. So I just want to thank you all for your contributions. I hope that today we went from discussing the crisis, discussing the impact, and then thinking about the solutions. And we may not have come to an exact agreement, but at least we've had that discussion and we have those ideas. And hopefully talking about confidence, that people in this room have the confidence for change, and we can hopefully be leaders ourselves. Just to say that it wasn't about me today, but I am an economist, and the organisation I work for does do a lot of work on the need for structural change, and an idea that we're really looking at is pre-distribution. So what do you do before tax and redistribution? What can you do to make the system right from the roots? So if you ever want to check us out, it's www.neweconomics.org. Thank you.